Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Building Resilient Solutions. I hope you're all safe and well this morning. It's good to have a bit of a time to reflect and understand and a bit of learning at the beginning of the day. It gets us all refreshed, charged up. So I hope you find this beneficial. My name is Mark Sheldon. I'm the founder and CEO of Savant. We're a C-suite search specialist. We specialize in finance and technology, as well as executive coaching. In a few moments, I'll introduce you to my co-presenter, Zoe. But at first, let me introduce you just to the agenda for the webinar again, in case you've missed it. There are going to be 4 areas covered: the change curve and looking at where we are on that, what is resilience, answering that question, boundaries at home and work, and finally, doing more with less, focusing on key strengths. We'll have Q&A time at the end of each session, but please send your questions and thoughts through at any point, and we'll obviously consolidate them and represent them at the appropriate time. Support documents have already been loaded up onto the webinar library for you to download. We will have a number of poll questions during the webinar relevant to each session, and afterwards you'll be invited to give your feedback overall. So just moving forward, Savant and Luminary Mindset have provided their services free of charge for this facility, this webinar today. However, more than ever at this particular seasonal time of the year, we ask for donations to our charity, Action for Children and Bite Night. Even a £10 donation will go a long way to make a real difference. Very sadly, each year, over 100,000 children in the UK sleep out, sleep rough, and so Action for Children work tirelessly to prevent this. And just to reference that point, when we're all here, as you can see, getting ready for Christmas, and with a seasonal family orientated, many children won't have that experience, and even a small donation will greatly support those who don't find themselves as fortunate as we do. So thank you for that in advance. Returning to the topic of the webinar, building resilient solutions. What is the definition of resilience? I did a bit of a Google search, but it's, I think, what we all know: the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It's our toughness, perhaps. The ability to spring back into shape, our elasticity. Moving that forward into psychological resilience, the ability to mentally or emotionally cope with a crisis, or to return to a pre-crisis status. We naturally protect ourselves from negative effects of stress and building the tools that we have to protect ourselves. If you read up about it, so resilience is built principally, apparently, around 5 pillars: self-awareness, mindfulness, self-care, positive relationships, and purpose. And obviously, by strengthening these pillars, we can become more resilient to change. Okay. To my mind, optimism is the key to it all. As somebody famous once said, nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. We can change things the next second. Okay. We need not to give up. We must interpret setbacks as temporary, localized, and changeable to create an optimistic mindset. We can influence our own outcome. We've got to believe that, and we need to inspire others to do that. Another quote: it is impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all. Right? That's quite prophetic, but I think at the end of the day, a strong sense of meaning does result in a better performance. Optimism can be spread from a leader to their team. That's our roles. This is our challenge, to lead positively in what are challenging times, but equally to make people realize and understand the positivity that's around us, even in the darkest hour. So I'll move forward. Let's look at this going forward. Zoe and I first met about 3 years ago. I was immediately impressed by Zoe's energy, credibility, and insight into a number of different subjects and topics from the perspective of emotional intelligence. She's a coach, CEOs, executive and non-exec directors in a coaching capacity. And now I think I was trying to add up, we've presented at over 10 different webinars or seminars in the past 2 or 3 years. In partnership, we've developed a portfolio of executive coaching services available to all Savant's customers on a one-to-one or a team basis. I believe we've even got some recipients of the coaching on the session today. So if you're interested in that and taking this further after the webinar, please do get in touch with either of us. So with no further ado, I'm pleased to introduce you to Zoe. Enjoy the webinar and please do ask questions, or I'll be managing that in the background. Zoe, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Good evening from Sydney, where I now live, but good morning for you all in England. And thanks for having me, and thanks for participating today. As Mark said, Mark's going to be watching over the comments box. So if you have questions that pop into your head, do please capture them in the comments box, and I will be pausing after each segment of this webinar to answer your questions live, so that they don't get missed and you don't have to try and remember them until the end. So yes, resilience. So never before have we had to focus on resilience as much as we have now, and well-being and mental well-being and emotional intelligence. A couple of years ago, when Mark mentioned we started doing these seminars, it was something that people were interested in, but it wasn't really understood the importance or the relevance of emotional intelligence on performance, especially in the corporate world. And I work with a number of or know a number of elite sports, professional sports people, men and women, and emotional intelligence has been something that they've known about and have worked on for decades. Most sports men and women have sports psychologists that work with them on their mindset and their resilience building to perform, but it's just not something that we've really captured or wrapped our arms around in the corporate space. So I'm really pleased that we're doing these seminars for you, and I'm really pleased that organisations are becoming more emotionally intelligent and a bit more savvy around resilience. So we'll dive straight in to the first area that we're going to look at, which is just the change curve revisited. So if you've been on one of these webinars before, you'll remember the change curve. If you've not, this is just a quick recap so that the context is set correctly. So this is the Kubler-Ross change curve. It's not my change curve. It was developed about in the 1960s using different psychological tests and reviews and surveys of how people respond to change. Now, not everybody responds in the same way, so this is not a linear process, but most people move through these stages as defined on this change curve infographic. And what's happened this year, obviously the entire world has changed and we've all had to respond to the same thing. So it's never happened before, and hopefully will never happen again, but we don't know. But every single individual has had to respond to a change in circumstances of sorts in the last 9 months. And we move through a number of different emotions when change occurs. Now, on the next slide, I'll come on to why that is. But when things around us change or move, we initially feel denial, we then dip. And anger isn't necessarily the feeling that you might resonate with. It might be frustration, it might be despondency, it might be apathy, but there's a real dip in emotional well-being after change is experienced. And then only then, once we've moved through that dip, can we then come out the other side and become more accepting of the change. Now, what I've noticed over the last 9 months is globally, countries have moved through this change curve at different paces and in different ways. Within countries, regions have moved through it in different ways. Organisations will all be moving through it in different ways, and individuals and communities will be moving through it in different ways. So we've got this change response happening globally. All of us are at different points on this curve, and you don't just move through it once. You move backwards, you move forwards. It's very fluid. So it's something for leaders certainly to be aware of, that you'll have the ripple effects of change moving through your organisation emotionally, and we need to understand how to notice that and how to then respond to it, because as I'll come on to later, how we feel and then how we deal with those emotions is how we then make decisions, and it impairs our judgment as well. So that's the change curve revisited. Now, how change is impacting your team. So this stress response system is the best way to illustrate it. It's a biological and chemical reaction. We are a walking electromagnetic chemical reaction body, basically. And this is what's happening is our senses are perceiving change. So we might read something in the news, we might watch something on the internet, we might hear something on the radio, or we might physically experience something like a physical change in our environment. And all of that sensory input is then sent to our brain, and our brain tries to make sense of it, and it'll produce stress hormones if it perceives it as a threat. Now, this is really relevant because what we perceive as a threat is different dependent on our experiences, life experiences, and how we perceive change is different. But ultimately, if it's perceived as a threat, which of course this year, most people would have perceived a global pandemic as a threat, cortisol, stress hormone, is released into the body. Now, initially, that might not be such a bad thing because there are different states of survival that we go into. There's the fight response, which is when you'll notice high-performing individuals in the workplace may be more resilient and more tolerant to stress hormone. They might actually need a little bit more stress than other people to perform. So they are the ones that around March, April time would have come out fighting, would have come out really keen to respond to the incident, to respond to the needs of the organisation. Their performance might have actually accelerated or elevated April, May, June, July. Those are the fight responders. You may have, and you might be one yourself, we've got a poll in a minute that's going to find out. You may now be starting to notice that those individuals, or yourself, if you are indeed a fight responder to stress and change, you might be starting to feel very low in your resilience and your reserves. You might be looking forward to Christmas, desperately needing a break, because what will have been happening is your body will have been accumulating all of that stress hormone, and it'll be making your muscles fatigued. It'll be interrupting your sleep. It'll be interrupting decision making and judgment. And then we've got the other two types of survival mode, which is flight and freeze, and they're very different. Freeze isn't so problematic as flight. Freeze is when people actually go into a state of overwhelm, but they can still see that the action needs to be taken, so they delegate. So if anybody's gone into freeze leadership mode in your teams, or indeed you have, there's a lot of procrastinating but delegating at the same time, which means things still get done. It might take a little bit longer once the procrastination has been overcome, but action will still be taken. Flight mode, on the other hand, is where people actually try to get away from the threat. So that might be individuals who were very keen to go on furlough, for example, very keen to go part-time, very keen to work from home, not wanting to come into the office, not wanting to put their videos on, really trying to run away from the threat and get away from it, which can be very disruptive to the performance of an organisation. So remote working has exacerbated this, because it's harder for us as leaders to touch and feel the body language, the cues, the signals, observe our teams and notice where they're at. I know a number of you that responded to my email, thank you very much, are experiencing teams who have low morale and motivation, and checking in on their well-being is much harder. And these waves of emotion, if we go back to that change curve, it's like waves, it's coming and going, and it's very unpredictable. So managing those waves of emotion are making leadership much more challenging. So just first poll, please, Mark. I'd love to know who, so we're going to ask you to answer a question. Which survival leadership style have you resonated with? I'd love to know those that are participating on this webinar, just to see what the spread is between fight, flight and freeze leadership, where you think you went around April, May time. Is that poll available, Mark?
Yeah, that should be just on your screens now.
Now, while people are answering that poll, I must just say it's really important to mention individuals won't necessarily be aware that this is happening to them. So we'll come on to self-awareness later, but this is all happening in the background. So this is all happening in our subconscious brain. And often, this is why we're talking about resilience today. Often it's potentially a little bit too late once we start to notice the impact of this, because it's when it's starting to impact on our well-being. But yeah, people won't necessarily be aware that this is happening to them. So I can't see the poll, Mark, because I'm sharing my screen. So you need to tell me when that's closed.
Right, it's okay. So the results came through that we had 92% of people voted. 77% were in fight mode.
Yeah.
11% in flight, and 21% in freeze.
Right. Now that, thank you very much. And that is why we've had so many people asking for resilience webinars and resilience coaching, because if we've got 77% of the population in fight, which is what we've seen, people have been very reactive to this change. Resilience levels will be dipping. And then, of course, what's those 22% that were in freeze, there'll be a different state of mind that's now being experienced, which may not be so much fatigue, but freeze and flight. It may be that some decision making that's happened in the last 6 months might not have necessarily, you'll be looking back on it and wondering whether it was the right decision to make at the time, whether some decisions that were made 6 months ago were necessarily best for yourself, best for your family, best for your organisation. So the decision making in flight and freeze is the problematic area, whereas with fight, it's the resilience and it's the energy that we use up and expend at quite high rates. So that's really useful. Thank you. Are there any questions that have come in, Mark, or shall I keep going?
Just a couple of quick things, which are really more just saying, just to re-emphasize, we will send out a copy of, whilst the handouts are downloadable, if you want to request them. I know Yvette has requested it, we'll send them out email as well to individuals who would like them.
Yeah.
Just again, another question from Mark. I mentioned earlier the 5 pillars of resilience: self-awareness, mindfulness, self-care, positive relationships, and purpose. Yeah, I think that it's worth building that up as well.
Exactly.
But other than that, no other specific questions. We'll come back to them in due course. But please do send the questions through.
Thank you. And this is the self-awareness piece. This is the, people need to be aware of where they've been and how the change has been impacting on them before they can do anything with it. We can't change anything that we can't see and feel. Thank you for that, Mark. So strategies, so what to do as leaders. So share the change curve. So I'm glad that people are asking about this deck, because it would be really useful for your teams to actually have a conversation around this change curve on a regular basis, not just as a one-off, but actually use it as a tool, as a check-in. So I would, if I was leading a large team now, I'd encourage the team to use this as a check-in before team meetings to say, okay, where are we? And have people support each other. So if you have got individuals stuck at any point, denial and anger, or this initial dip, if you've got people that are stuck there, give them support either on a one-on-one basis or as a group, depending on that individual. And likewise, use this to talk to people about different the different ways in which they've responded, and just name it and get it out on the table, which can often help alleviate some of the questioning that we might be now doing about ourselves and how we've responded to change in the last 6 months. So that's creating a language around emotional intelligence that's not threatening, because what people need right now is they need their nervous systems to calm down. This whole stress response system has been annihilating all of our bodies and minds for 9 months. And there will be an accumulation of stress hormone in our bodies. So if I were a leader of a team now going into the Christmas break, I'd be encouraging people to really be mindful. And this is the mindful piece that was just addressed in the 5 pillars. Mindfully rest, mindfully eat, mindfully drink, mindfully celebrate Christmas. Because again, alcohol increases this stress response system. Consuming a lot of sugar and caffeine increases this stress response system. So do we want people going off on the Christmas break and coming back even more fatigued because they've done what they think is alleviating stress for their bodies and minds, but actually it's just accumulating more of this cortisol? Or can you actually get some well-being experts, or even just use your own knowledge to encourage people to try and start to process some of this stress hormone out of their bodies? Normalize taking breaks for nature, breath work, physical exercise. So people are I'm calling it 2020 Zoomitis. People seem to be having back-to-back Zooms for in excess of 6-7 hours. That is really, really, really bad for our stress levels. Physical exercise and being in nature helps us process this cortisol out of our bodies. It helps us reconnect with something other than the screen, the thinking brain, the IQ. It helps us connect with ourselves in a different way. So really normalize taking those kind of breaks in between Zoom sessions, and start creating your new culture. So we're going to talk about expected behaviors a little bit more, but set expected behaviors inside the context of change and uncertainty. So you might have been expecting a certain level of performance or a certain kind of performance from your people in 2019. It is very unlikely that those behaviours are going to be the same this year and next year as they were last year. What different behaviours are you going to need to encourage and reinforce to get the best out of your teams? It is probably going to be things like taking regular breaks. It is probably going to be things like speaking up more about how they're feeling. So again, going back to this change curve and using tools that are about feelings, are about how people are showing up, how people are thinking and decision making. talking not less, but addressing about having more of a balance between the technical and the problem solving and the strategy and the risk management, and actually the well-being and the human side of things, because that will help resilience, it will help build trust, and it will help build collaboration and community. So those expected behaviours that we would have had as part of our cultural framework last year need to be reviewed and revisited. I don't know how many of you delegate culture to your HR teams. If you do, I'd highly recommend that you, I mean, HR is a good place to put culture, but for me at times like this, I think culture needs to be owned by the CEO, the executive team, and then everybody needs to be regarded as a cultural custodian, with HR supporting that from a behavioural perspective rather than HR owning it. So I would certainly suggest bringing the ownership of that culture up into the C-suite, and then having expected behaviours cascaded down through the hierarchy system in the organisation. So this is poll 2. Fascinated to understand the answer to this one. Have you set and embedded expected behaviours for this year and next to address the shift in the environment, I guess, within your organisation? So if you could pop up poll 2, please, Mark. And while we're doing that, the bold statement that I've got at the bottom of these strategies: trust that by giving people space, their productivity will increase. Now, it seems almost impossible to believe that if we give people more time to rest and rejuvenate, that more will get done. It is absolutely true when we're under circumstances like we are now, where it's very high pressure, very high stress. The more opportunity we can give people, because they won't take it, because people's brains are telling them that they need to be doing more and more and more. So the more we can try and reinforce the need for people to take breaks and actually process the stress out of their bodies, the more productive they'll come back after the new year. So how are we doing with that poll, Mark?
We've got 75, we've still got votes coming in, so I'll just run it another 10 seconds or so.
Anybody wants any support on what we mean by setting expected behaviours, please do get in touch with us, because I'm very happy to give away much more of my time to talk this through, because it's not necessarily a commonly understood thing to do. But there are what I call golden threads that link behaviour all the way through your decision-making, risk management process, all the way through to your strategic outcomes and what you're creating in terms of strategic outcomes from behaviour. Right, I can see my button and my little toggle's disappeared. So what does it say?
So basically we're saying that 19% said yes, 2020 required new behaviours to be defined, 28% no, I was not focused on this in 2020, and 53% put somewhat in areas that we have addressed this. Great,
that's brilliant. Yeah, okay, interesting. Somewhat I thought would be the most common answer there. Thank you. So that's the change curve revisited. So what is resilience? So Mark, thank you so much, because you've you summarised it beautifully. So just a little definition there: the ability of people or things to feel better quickly after something unpleasant, such as a shock or injury. And then I love the second one, which is the ability of a substance, although we're not substances, but maybe we are, to return to its original shape after it has been bent, stretched or pressed. So sometimes people can misunderstand what resilience actually is, and I don't know, I certainly don't believe this, but some leaders that I've spoken to say some of their teams think that if they're not being resilient, and this might be an English thing, if we're not resilient, then we're not strong, we're not good at our job, we're not capable. But actually it's just a part of being human. And this wheel, this image that I've got on the left, is a psychometric tool that I use in my coaching to measure emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is about our resilience. It's about how we can know and manage our own emotions and the emotions of those around us, to bounce back from hardship and to be able to deal with change and uncertainty. And it's a really great way. It's a self-assessment tool, and there is also a 360-degree element to it as well, so you can get other people's feedback. But it's a really great way to just, again, going back to the 5 pillars of resilience, to raise that self-awareness. And most of the work that I do with my clients is around self-awareness. It's about exploring the blind spots that we have as leaders, that we may or may not be aware are influencing the culture of our organisation and the way that things are being done. And it's interesting because sometimes CEOs or COOs have me come in to work with them, and they want me to sort of address the culture as something separate to them. You know, the culture of my organisation, this thing over here is not working for me, and can you help me fix it? But we spend 99% of the time together talking about them and their leadership and their behaviour and the way they're showing up, because the culture is that. It starts at the top, it starts with the tone that's set by the CEO, and most of the work needs to be done on the subconscious decision making that we've got running in the background, and the subconscious belief systems that we have that are casting that leadership shadow across the whole organisation. So if you're seeing what you're seeing in your organisation, if you're seeing low resilience, or if you're seeing behaviour that you don't necessarily think is best for what you're trying to achieve, it's a mirror. That's a mirror being held up to you as leader of that organisation. So without judging yourself too harshly, or without making any of it wrong or mean anything, it's really important to be able to step back from that objectively and say, okay, well, if my organisation is a mirror of me and my leadership, what is my belief system and what is my emotional intelligence, and how am I showing up to create that? And if we can bring it back to our own self-awareness, you can then be empowered to make the changes. Resilient, when we experience change, as I've just described, when people go into anger or denial, we feel uncomfortable, and we're also not brought up to believe that feelings of discomfort are okay. We're often taught to stop crying, or to move on quickly, or to, you know, bounce back quickly. But actually, if we go back to this change curve slide, in order for us not to get stuck in fear and anger, we actually need to acknowledge the feelings that we're feeling when we're at the bottom of this change curve. It's not going to help us to move through the change curve by not expressing and acknowledging those emotions. And if you look in this wheel, this self-expression, the orange area of emotional intelligence, emotional expression is really important at this time for leaders to be saying to people, do you know what, we're just going to listen to how you're feeling. We're not going to try and fix anything. We're not going to try and resolve anything, but we are going to listen. So yeah, feelings of discomfort need to be expressed and worked through so that we can then bounce back and regain our resilience. Now this slide is telling us which 3 subscales of emotional intelligence are really, really important at the moment when it comes to dealing with change. So we've got something called reality testing within the decision making, the green area, and impulse control. Now, your decision making within your organisation, the judgments that people are making, I mean, I don't know if it's too soon to use this as an example, but I am starting to use it. The toilet paper fiasco, which was literally a direct consequence of this stress response system. So people experienced change, then they went into stress response system. The cortisol levels built up so high that their decision making was completely impaired, and their impulse control dropped to a significantly low level. So that is a great example of how emotional intelligence can drive people's decision making into the most illogical of places. Now, what we don't want, those people, and maybe, you know, some of us did it ourselves, we are running these organizations, we're running the corporations that are on this call. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. This is part of being human, but we do have the potential to really make some very questionable decisions when we're under stress and our resilience is low. And that's why reality testing is so important, because reality testing is, okay, I'm not going to stay in the past. I'm not going to get into the future. I'm actually going to just deal with the facts that I have today. Because what people were doing when they were going out and panic buying and hoarding food was they were getting really scared about a potential fear of a future that they'd created in their minds that may or may not materialize. They were not in the present moment, where there was obviously an abundance of, if people hadn't have hoarded, there would have been an abundance of resources for everybody. And the impulse control dropped, and then people took action. The other thing that we need to focus on is emotional self-awareness. So people weren't aware of the fact that they were doing this because they were just scared. And if the media had been more responsible at that time and actually had done what I would hope media outlets would do, which is actually try and calm people down rather than exasperating it, there would have been more news about the fact that actually, you know, hey everybody, yes, this is scary. Yes, we're in uncertain times. However, don't worry, because we've got everything that we need. We're not going to run out of anything, but we certainly are if we carry on the way that we are today. So in the context of your leadership and in the context of what's going on within your organizations, if you can have people become more emotionally self-aware and talk about how they're feeling, you can then see directly how that might be linking to their decision making. Are they making decisions based on the reality of the information that you have today, or are they fearful about a potential future or anxious about what happened in the past? And are they being more or less impulsive depending on fight, flight or freeze? Because fighters will be more impulsive, flighters and freezers will be less impulsive, they'll procrastinate more, so it depends. We need to, as this slide says, we need to start incorporating time and space into our daily habits for pause, because that's when the nervous system can calm down and we can actually get some rational thinking going on again. And people are working very, very long hours, too long. This is going to exacerbate the problem. And of course, as we know, working these long hours is not sustainable. People have been going for 9 months now, and I know that everybody is ready for this break and ready to actually get some of their energy back. So that brings me on to the next poll, and I've got a number of questions here because I'd love to know how many. We've got a little poll now just to see how many hours a week people are working. And this is more for you to see the responses, because I know that when I speak to individuals on a coaching basis, we're not sharing this information with our peers or with our colleagues. We're not talking about the hours that we're doing. And I think people feel a little bit alone in what they're doing and the amount of effort that they're putting in to their role at the moment. But these long hours, especially over remote working conditions, are not sustainable at all. It's a different type of energy that gets taken out of our bodies when we're on screens. And we've all, any of us that are parents, we know that we try to keep our kids off screens because we know it's not good for them. And then ironically, we're now all on screens more than we ever have been before. So it's an interesting dichotomy that's going on.
Okay.
It's hard to switch off. The feedback that I'm getting from people that I'm working with, it's hard to switch off when you've got your computer and you're at home, and we'll come on to boundaries later, but it's those boundaries have been blurred between working in the office and working at home. We're now just working seemingly 24/7. So this will be an interesting poll response.
Hopefully everyone can see that. So 17% are doing their contracted hours, 38% are between 40 and 50, and 45% 50+ hours a week.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me. Now that's good for people to see. It's good for people to see from two perspectives. So one, those 45% who are doing more than 50 hours a week, you're not alone. But then it's also good to see that 17% are managing to stay within the guidelines. I don't know whether we might, it might be an idea for Mark and I to talk about doing smaller roundtables after this for us to get some of those people together to share strategies and to share what's going on across the different poll results, because that'll be interesting to have an open dialogue on that one.
Absolutely. That sounds good.
Yeah, it would be a good idea, wouldn't it? I'd love to hear from the 17% and then also hear from the 45% what's going on in their industries, because it's not that anybody's doing anything better or worse, it's just that there's obviously different circumstances and different environments that are playing out there. Strategies. So measure your own and your team's resilience. It will change over time and keep retesting it. So how do you measure it? Well, you can use these tools like this emotional intelligence one, or for me, it's through conversation. It's understanding what you're looking for. Once you know what you're looking for, you can then see it. So if you know that you're looking for different stress responses in the fight, flight or freeze, you can ask different questions around how people are feeling and how they're responding to change. One of the things that I recommended to one client a couple of weeks ago was actually, if you've got people who are, and we'll come on to strengths later, but if you've got people in your organisation who enjoy change and who are feeling more resilient at this time than others, have them as use them to, if they want to be used, ask them first obviously, but use them to try and help build up motivation and morale with other teams. Now, if you can't do this physically, but I know some places here in Australia have been doing like remote working bubbles, where they've been having 2 or 3 colleagues who live close to them sharing an office space in one person's house. That might not be physically possible, but even if you just have them put in smaller huddle groups, support groups across Zoom or Teams or whatever tool you're using, and encourage them to connect on a regular basis, not around work, but around well-being and resilience, and have one person in each of those smaller huddle groups that is maybe someone who's not being impacted so much by the change as the others, to try and alleviate some of that responsibility off you as the leader. Because I know as leaders we think that we should be motivating the teams ourselves single-handedly. Use your team, use the strengths that you've got in the team to take some of that burden off you. Put some EQ support systems in place, such as definitions. So this goes back to the expected behaviours, but then defining what would reality testing look like for you within your team and your organisation. What behaviour do you want people to do to demonstrate that they are reality testing and that their decision making is sound and it is in line with your risk appetite and it is in line with what you're trying to achieve. And also don't forget to ask permission. So when people's resilience is low, we're more sensitive, our listening filters change. People might be in fear and anxiety around losing their job. There may be some insecurities going around. So really ask permission to give feedback, especially when it comes to impulse control, because that can be one that isn't necessarily regarded as a positive if you go around saying that people are being more impulsive. But then it depends on the industry, right? You might want people to be being more impulsive right now because there's opportunity out there at the moment as well, of course. And finally, keep the dialogue impersonal. So if you want to talk about I, that's fine, but never ideally use the word you. Always use the word we, to make sure that people don't feel alienated or marginalised when having these conversations around feelings, because again, it is a sensitive subject. Have we got any questions that came in then, Mark?
No, I think we'll keep rolling forward if that's okay, and we'll catch up with a couple more questions at the next session.
Okay, so we've got boundaries. So this is a quick one. So this is just, we've got the blurred lines between home and work. And while at the moment the tendency is for us to play the short game, playing the long game is where organisations and teams are going to really see the benefit next year. So I think the time has passed. I don't know, I can't generalise, but if you feel the time has passed for crisis management to now be put to one side and a more longer term business continuity plan to be put in place around people and well-being and resilience, please do that. Please start planning that now before the Christmas break, so that when you come back in January, you've got the long game planned out in terms of what are you going to do on a consistent and regular basis to make sure that resilience standards are maintained. That would include something like a resources audit. So people, when they're stressed, tend to cling on to what they know. People will be looking for anchors of certainty. So you might find that people are doing things that you don't necessarily want them to be doing, but they want to do those things because it makes them feel secure. So do a resources audit, get conscious on to where energy is being wasted or potentially underutilized as well. Encourage an open dialogue. So when you're checking in with people on resilience, just have them I know it's difficult, but try and get them to be as open as possible around where their boundaries are being blurred between, childcare, sharing a space with a partner, living arrangements, what they're missing from a, support structure perspective, because you've got all these different tiers of lockdown going on at the moment. So really encourage an open dialogue. And be consistent, because again, when we're in a fight, flight or freeze mode, we're scanning our environment, we're being hyper vigilant and we're very alert. So they are going to be watching you from a leadership perspective like hawks, and they'll be looking for inconsistencies, because that is what their nervous system is telling them to do. It'll be like, look for inconsistencies, look for fear, look for danger, so that we can protect ourselves. So be really consistent. Burnout is visible to others, and it's part of your corporate brand. So if you as a leader, 77% have been in fight mode. Now you might think that you are not appearing to be looking burnt out or exhausted or low on your resilience, but unfortunately we leak our emotions, we leak what's going on inside. We can't be putting on our corporate mask consistently all the time. So it's really important to know that that will become part of your corporate brand or your culture if we don't address it. And the final one is to agree within your team what the boundaries are and hold each other accountable. So another thing that's been coming up a lot with my clients is accountability. And people and leaders seem to be worried about making people accountable because they don't want to stress them more. But if there are any parents on this webinar, if you think about it from a parenting perspective, accountability and boundaries and rules and structure make children feel safer. And it's the same, and that's because of their nervous system. And we know this with children, and we know this when we're parenting, but we don't apply that same philosophy to the corporate space. Not saying that people in our teams are like children, we're just all humans. But that structure, accountability framework, firm, clear, consistent, that has integrity, will make people, that gives them that thing to anchor onto. So don't be scared to really hold people accountable, not in a threatening way, but in a supportive way, you know, a supportive and empathetic way, to say we're putting this structure in place so that we've all got a framework that we can form around. Otherwise, we're just kind of bouncing around trying to, you know, find our own individual anchors, which won't align your culture and move you forward holistically. So next poll, I'd love to know, are your team, so how aware are you? So this is the awareness, you've done the self-awareness. How aware are you of your team? Are they working longer hours than last year? Do you even know whether they're working longer hours? That's the next poll, Mark, please, poll 4. Because this is point 3, encouraging an open dialogue about where boundaries are being blurred. If you're having that open dialogue, you should know whether your team are working longer hours than you. And it'd be interesting to know whether those that are working within their contracted hours or less than 50 hours a week, is that being mirrored within your organisation? And likewise for the 45% who are working 50 hours a week more, is that being mirrored within your organisation? Going back to the point that our culture is a mirror of our leadership.
Just give this 10 more seconds.
No worries.
So 50% exactly of our teams are working longer.
Yeah.
33% no, and 17% don't know.
Great. Great. So again, having that open dialogue around that 50%, what is it that, and you must surely know what's causing that from a process or tech, from a technical knowing perspective, like what it is about the environment, what it is about the strategy, what it is about the tasks that need to be fulfilled on all the projects. But then will be some behavior sitting beneath that as well, where, like I said, people are looking to hold on to things that they know and that they can do and they can do well, that may or may not be useful for the organisation at this time. Thank you for that. And the final poll, I'd like to do 2 consecutive if that's okay. So are you aware of resilience levels within your team? Has it been tested? So this is poll 5. So either have you done a survey or questionnaire, a well-being questionnaire? Have you done any kind of emotional intelligence testing? Have you done any surveys verbally, or are your leadership teams being educated on how to coach on resilience from HR or otherwise? It'd be interesting to know how many people are actually embedding awareness around resilience. And again, if we do any smaller roundtables, it'd be great to have these poll results to then group people together, invite people to share with like-minded or opposing results.
Excuse me. We'll just give this 10 more seconds.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, are you aware of the resilience levels within your team? 26% said yes, 74% no.
Okay, great. That is something that I would highly recommend trying to put. I know everyone's really busy in the run up to Christmas, but if you could put something in place before Christmas, or at least have it ready to go when people come back, that's going to be something, because this is for me something that should be high up on the risk agenda, because it is, again, going back to that decision making, which is across every part of the organisation. It's not specific to one department or one set of individuals. It'll be, yeah. Okay, thank you everybody. Finally, doing more with less strength. So a number of people came back to me and said, look, how do, you know, I've got less people, because people either have been out they've requested part-time, people have left, we've had to make redundancies, or the furlough scheme has resulted in us having less resource, but we're being asked to do more. So my answer to that is strengths-based leadership. So And a lot of the concepts that I use to coach individuals, executives and leaders, it can almost seem impossible to believe that it's as simple as it can be, but this is very, very, very effective. We cannot build performance on weaknesses, and so many of our performance management tools and systems that we have in place in the corporate world look at gaps, they look at what's not working, they look at areas for improvement, they look at areas for development. That, in my personal view, and I've spent the last 20 years observing this and auditing it, and now working with leadership teams on this, I believe that is a huge mistake. We are investing way too much time and money and energy and effort into developing against people's gaps and limitations, and we're not spending enough time focusing on their strengths. The more someone plays to their strengths, everything else will improve as a byproduct. But the more people play to their strengths, the more in flow they are, the more energy they have, the more motivated they are, the more inspired they are, the more fulfilled they are. It's like a superpower that, if we can tap into it, is incredibly effective in creating performance. We see it in many other industries outside of the corporate world, and I keep going back to the sporting analogy, but sport is a perfect example. You do not have sports men and women not playing to their strengths. They do what they do best, and they just do more of it, and they will train and repeat and train and repeat to their strengths until they reach their goals and targets. So there's again another tool that I use in my coaching, which is a quote here, Clifton Strengths Finders. So 40 years of psychological research and studies that has gone into the power of strengths. And their quote here is, your greatest chance to succeed at work or anywhere else lies in strengthening what you naturally do best and just doing more of it. It is that simple. But we can't do more of what we're good at until we know what we're good at. So this is their psychometric test that I use. And what it does is there are 34 results. This is just a test, a sample report. It's not a specific individuals, but it's there are 34 strengths that they've come up with, and you get your top 5, and then you can see where you land on the others. But the top 5 for me are the most important, because if we know everyone's top 5 strengths, and if we know our own top 5 strengths, we can then play to them, and we can play to them and repeat. There are many studies that suggest that it improves quality of life. But more importantly for this webinar, people are 6 times more likely to be engaged in their jobs, because they're going to be doing things that they want to do. They're going to be doing things that make them feel good. It's a reward system. So if you know anything about psychology and you've heard of Pavlov's dogs, Pavlov identified this reward system where dogs that wanted food, when they put the food down, a bell would ring, and then eventually the dog's saliva glands the brain was trained to produce saliva on just the sound of the bell, with or without the presence of food. So our brains will be programmed to respond to reward. So if we're rewarding people by allowing them to play to their strengths, then they're going to show up more keen, more enthusiastic, more motivated. So this is hopefully answering that question around, how do I motivate my teams? If you can be bold and brave enough to not disregard, but break some of the rules around job descriptions and who's doing what and why they're doing what, and just say, okay, actually, if we were to look at our team's strengths and pull those strengths together and say, right, you're the best person to do this because you've got a strength that's going to mean you're motivated, and even if you don't know how to do it, you're going to learn quickly how to do it because you're motivated, as opposed to giving it to the obvious person who's done something like it before, who it may not be part of their strengths makeup. So just some stats here. So teams that focus on strengths every day, they have much more productivity, positive energy, more likely to achieve their goals, and confident, and they experience less stress. So this again is another one of those strategies for dealing with resilience. If you want people to build up their resilience reserves, when they're in flow and when they're playing to their strengths, their nervous system is not heightened. It's not a threatening situation to be in. It's actually an enjoyable, joyful and fulfilling place to be. So that cortisol will be reduced, the adrenaline won't be pumping as hard. And this is particularly useful for people who've been in flight or freeze, because it will be reassuring and it will be comforting for them to be doing something that gives them a little bit of certainty and that anchor that we've been talking about. Are there any questions so far, Mark, before I move on to the final key takeaways?
Adrian has asked a couple of questions. If those strengths are limited, aren't you going to get a narrow, biased culture? And how would you fit diversity into this if it's not one of your strengths?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because it depends diversity of what. If you're referring to diversity of thought, these strengths aren't necessarily how people think and their thought process. It's to do with their preferences around what it is. Yeah, so it's not, so you can have two people, well, in fact I do very recently, and some of them might be on the call, but I do have two people that I've recently carried out this strengths assessment with. They have, their top three are exactly the same, but they could not be more different in terms of their decision making, their thought processes. One's a CFO, and the other person is in operations, a COO. So their roles and responsibilities are completely, different, divergent. One has to be more commercially minded, and he's more in the future, and he's more like around strategy and building a lean and efficient operation. And the other one's in the detail around the figures and legal and HR. So this doesn't mean that people are going to be doing the same thing. It's just their preferences, so that you can tap into that preference and get more out of them energetically. Great question, Adrian. Yeah, I love that one. Thank you.
Does the maturity of the business not impact on whether you concentrate on strengths or weaknesses?
Absolutely. And when we're talking about like the life cycle, so maturity and life cycle of the business. So again, there's one client I'm working with who wonderfully this year, despite all that's going on, they've got a growth strategy, a big growth strategy. And of course, the strengths that they need at the leadership team when you're looking to grow and expand and grow your top line are going to be different to an organization where maybe they've gone beyond an aggressive growth strategy and they're looking more to become lean and efficient and or standardize the way that they're doing things. So absolutely. So this is why you need to be clear on what your strategic outcomes are, and that's that link that I said at the beginning. So strategic outcomes, decision making and risk management, behavior and culture. So the strengths or the behavior and culture, expected behavior and culture that you're creating, need to be directly linked to the way you want the business to make decisions and manage risk, therefore to achieve your strategic outcomes. And that will depend on where you're at on the maturity curve and the organizational life cycle. Definitely.
Yeah, that covers the questions at this stage.
Great. So key takeaways. I love this quote from Mr. Einstein. I never know whether these quotes are real or not, but you know what? I'm just going to go with it because I love it. So everybody is a genius, and I do believe this. So I'm, strengths coach and positive psychology. I think everybody has the potential to be whatever you regard as genius is. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Now, we get this in education and we get this with our children, but again, the corporate world, with the performance management frameworks that we have in place, some of us are trying to have fish climb trees, and people won't speak up and say, do you know what, I'm just not up for that. It doesn't float my boat. They'll be a fish and they'll try and climb the tree because people want to be able to do what's asked of them. So key takeaway here, first one is self-awareness. Know yourself and your underlying strengths and beliefs so that you can choose how to lead, but then that will also create that mirror, that reflection within the organization. Understand how you and your organization have responded to the current levels of uncertainty. So use the change curve, use dialogue around survival response, resilience levels, whatever fits where you're currently at in terms of life cycle and maturity, but start verbalizing it, start creating it as part of your language and your culture, because culture is created through language. It's what we talk about, it's the stories we tell, it's the experiences that we share. Set boundaries around expected behaviors and make that link from behavior through to decision making, risk management, all the way out the other side to outcome. And when you're talking about outcomes and why, lessons learned, go back to behavior. Don't stop at the what happened from a process perspective, what happened from a systems perspective, what happened. Go back to the behavior before that to get to the root cause and set boundaries around those behaviors. Role model good work-life boundaries and prioritize self-care. So there are a lot of leaders who are saying to me, oh, I find it really hard because I want my team to take rest, but I'm not doing that myself. That's not going to work, unfortunately. You have to be walking the talk and focus on strengths. I can't stress this enough. If you've got the ability to figure out what your strengths are and others, you get 10, 20, 30% more out of people because their resilience will bounce back much quicker.
Shall we ask one final question?
Yes, please. Call 6. Would you be interested in a follow-up session to explore more of this? I'd love to offer my time. Absolutely love. I've got a 30-minute slot set up available for anybody that would like to have a chat about anything that we've talked about today. and the poll is open, and if you select the box, I'll get that information and somebody will get in touch with you. But we did cover a lot today. I hope it was useful. There was quite a lot of strategies in there. I think it's a good time of year to do this kind of thing, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's provoking to myself. Our year end is in end of January, so the next 8 weeks is there's a lot of things to put into place for making next year the best it can be, but equally making sure everyone has a break, has a couple of weeks to charge the batteries up, clearly understands what the plan is, and yeah, we're all focused.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So just give the hold another 10 seconds.
There'll be a survey. I think there's a survey being sent out at the end of this as well, isn't there, Mark? Yeah, to give us any feedback on content and future events as well. Like I said, I think smaller roundtables on some of these more topical areas might be useful for people to attend.
So 40% of people have expressed an interest, or said they will be interested in exploring further, which is very good, very positive. And 60% I hope feel they've been educated by the session and feel they've learned that don't need any more at the stage.
Wonderful. I'm so pleased. Thank you everybody for attending, because you know, this run up is always really busy.
So thank you very much for attending the webinar. It is a big topic. I think Zoe's positivity comes through for all of us to witness and appreciate. It certainly resonates with myself. I'm sure it must do with all of us in our teams and our business, whether it's an organization or just a team around you. And certainly it personally resonates with me. That accumulated sort of stress hormone that must be built up in my body of what feels like 9 months of this. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having a good Christmas break. I've now got to be mindful though, not to, you know, do too much drinking, too much eating, and put it all into recharge myself. Okay, be healthy is what you're trying to say. Okay,
basically,
otherwise we're carrying us over to January. All right.
Yeah.
As I said, there is you'll be asked some questions afterwards. Please take a minute or two. That's all it'll take to answer some questions and feedback on the webinar itself. Equally, on the basis that people do, there is a reasonable amount of people who are interested. We'll invite you post the webinar if you want to join some follow-up sessions, which would be great. But look, we're open to asking questions. Executive coaching, search business is what we do. Yeah, it's about making the business world better. But I think really this year we've all learned we've got to build upon our strengths and look forward and have a purpose. And I think many of us have adapted. We're all on that change curve still. Everybody, leaders, everybody is on that change curve. So it's our own mindfulness is really important. We've got to look after ourselves. But if we don't speak to you before, have a fantastic Christmas, seasonal greetings. And as you can see, Zoe's all ready for Christmas. It looks very good. Looks very good. But thank you very much for attending. And yeah, have a great season. Cheers now.
Bye.
Bye.